Marriage is a good gift from God, but not everyone is called to pursue this gift, because singleness is also a good gift from God. And it's also true that we can pursue a good thing, but we can pursue it in the wrong way or at the wrong time. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 4 possible signs that God does not want you to pursue marriage. And just for clarification, these do not have to be signs that last forever. In other words, when the variables change in your life, it could then be the right time to pursue marriage when in the past it was not the right time to try to be married. Number 1, you should not pursue marriage if you would be happier in singleness. Throughout 1 Corinthians 7, Paul offers a wealth of information that can help someone know whether or not they should pursue a life of marriage or a life of singleness. However, this passage is notoriously confusing to people because throughout the passage, if you're not paying careful attention to the context, it feels like Paul is jumping back and forth and contradicting himself. In one section, he'll say something that is pro-marriage, and in another section, he'll say something that seems anti-marriage and pro-singleness. And so when you take the whole of 1 Corinthians 7, you'll see that there are major themes that link all the passages and verses together, but Paul is using different examples to prove the same point. So let me break it down a little further. Basically, the main point of 1 Corinthians 7 is that God wants us to find our primary happiness in Him and have an undivided devotion to the Lord. And then throughout the passage, he's going back and forth of, hey, if you have this variable, marriage is going to help you have an undivided devotion to the Lord. If you have these variables, singleness is going to help you have an undivided devotion to the Lord. And so it's not this idea that Paul's contradicting himself over and over on one side and on the other side. Rather, he's saying, whatever your situation, the whole point is to do what brings you the most happiness and joy in the Lord and what will bring Him the most glory. And that's the gauge we are called to use when deciding if we should be married or single. You can see this principle really specifically in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 40. This is where Paul says, "Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is. And I think that I too have the Spirit of God." In this context, he's talking about widows. So it's a very specific context. What I want you to see here, though, is the general principle that Paul is using in that you should choose what makes you happier. Did you see that? Thus, if you would be happier in singleness rather than in marriage, you should not be pursuing marriage. One sign that God is calling you to be in a relationship with someone is when you think, I'm happy in the Lord, but I think I would have more joy in my life if this other person also came into my life as a spouse, which really leads us to point 2. If you haven't met the right person yet, then God is not calling you to pursue marriage. The only thing more painful than being alone and lonely is being lonely when you're in a relationship with someone. A lot of people think it's better to be in the wrong relationship or just in any relationship rather than being alone. And that's just not true. When you're with the wrong person, you would be much happier alone. So you're not going to need to force yourself to be with someone you don't want to be with because, God's saying, oh, that's your only option, or hey, this is the one I have for you. If you're not excited about this person, it's not the person God has for you. Of course, excitement and desire can grow when you get to know somebody, but big picture, that principle remains. You're not going to have to force it. Number 3, if you want a simpler life, you should not get married. One reason Paul advocates for singleness in 1 Corinthians 7 is that marriage can create obligations and distractions that take our attention away from the Lord. Now, notice I said it can do that. It doesn't have to do that. And so, again, when you read the whole chapter of 1 Corinthians 7, it's very clear that Paul is not saying every single Christian who's ever existed would definitely be better off if they chose singleness. That is just not the context. You have to remember too that Paul's the one who wrote Ephesians 5:22 through 33. He's the one who said this relationship of a husband and wife is actually designed by God to reflect Christ and the church, which is obviously a big blessing to experience. So Paul's not saying marriage is bad, singleness is good. He's just saying the reality of it is that marriage can become a distraction because it does introduce extra obligations that you don't have when you're single. And that's what he was talking about in 1 Corinthians 7:32 through 35. He says, I want you to be free from anxiety. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife. And his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. So did you catch that last part there? Again, he says, my main point here is that I want you to have an undivided devotion to the Lord. For some, that means you should get married. And for other people, that means you should pursue singleness. Paul's theme of focusing totally on God is why in 1 Corinthians 7:29, he said, from now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none. Obviously, he's not telling spouses to neglect their roles as spouses. In 1 Corinthians 7:1 through 16, Paul gives numerous commands to spouses about treating each other properly. He wouldn't then instantly contradict himself that same chapter by telling spouses to live as though they are single. It's definitely possible to be fully devoted to Christ as a married person. And it's definitely possible to be fully devoted to Christ as a single person. And number 4, if you want marriage to solve your internal issues, you should not get married. The worst type of marriages occur when two people come together expecting the other person to solve their issues. It's basically like two dead batteries coming together so that they can get charged. The only thing that happens is that they end up getting very disappointed with each other. On the other hand, the best type of marriages are when two people come together to share the happiness and love that they're receiving from the Lord. Instead of trying to take from each other, they're able to give to each other because they're giving what they're receiving from God. These couples end up loving each other more and more as the years go on because they're deepening their walk with the Lord together. So if you want to get married because you think this is the missing key to your happiness and you're just never gonna find that contentment without a spouse, you should not get married because you are headed for a disaster. Rather, you should pursue marriage when you realize this is about sharing the love God has already given me. And it is a blessing. I'm not saying it doesn't add happiness to your life. And I'm not saying it's bad for you to want to be married and to be sad that you're not married. But again, if you're thinking this is the final solution for me, this is the main source of happiness, don't get married. When you know that God is the true source of joy your heart needs, then you are free to enjoy the lesser type of love that marriage can offer. I hope this was helpful. If it was, give this video a thumbs up. That'll help it spread to other people. That's really the goal for this channel, to reach people with biblical information that can really help them. I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com. Until next time, God bless.